Get off the property now. Sir, we found this wallet outside.
Please, I don't care.
Move.
There's $14,000 in there. We didn't take nothing. Please, just give it back to him.
You two sleep under a bridge, and you're handing back 14 grand, right?
We haven't eaten in 2 days. But this ain't ours.
Counted, every dollar still inside. He picked up the phone. A minute later, he hung up and looked at them differently.
62nd floor. They're waiting for you.
Edmund Thornton watched the elevator doors open. 2 teenagers stepped out, soaking wet, shaking, clothes torn. One of them held out the wallet with both hands like it was the heaviest thing he'd ever carried. Edmund hadn't felt anything in 2 years, until now. What happened next, nobody in that building saw coming. The bridge smelled like diesel and wet concrete. That was the first thing you'd notice if you ever walked underneath the overpass at the south end of Brooklyn, where Bryce and Caleb Wells had been living for the past 8 months. The second thing you'd notice was how organized it was. 2 sleeping areas made from flattened cardboard boxes lined with old newspaper for insulation. A plastic tarp angled overhead to catch the rain before it hit the ground. A row of water bottles along the far wall, half of them filled from the public fountain at Cadman Plaza.
They had a system.
Bryce, the older twin by 11 minutes, handled the outside world. He woke up at 5 every morning, walked 6 blocks to a diner called Rosie's, and washed dishes for 3 hours before the breakfast rush ended. The owner, a heavyset woman named Dolores Patterson, paid him $18 in cash and let him take whatever food was heading for the trash. Scrambled eggs gone cold, toast with one burnt edge, half-eaten pancakes that customers had pushed aside.
Bryce never ate first.
He wrapped everything in napkins and brought it back to Caleb.
Caleb was the quiet one.
He spoke when spoken to, nodded when words felt like too much, and spent every free hour inside the Brooklyn Public Library on Flatbush Avenue. He had taught himself to code on the library's public computers, Python first, then JavaScript, then enough React to build 2 small applications that lived on a free hosting platform nobody visited. One was a weather dashboard. The other was a budgeting tool for people living below the poverty line.
He had built both in under 2 months. Nobody knew about them.
Nobody used them, but Caleb kept improving them anyway, because building things was the only time his mind went quiet. Their mother, Gloria Wells, had died 8 months earlier in a hallway at Kings County Hospital, stage 4 lung cancer. She had never smoked a day in her life. The doctor said it was environmental. Years of cleaning office buildings at night with industrial chemicals, no mask, no ventilation, no union to fight for better conditions. She was 41.
Gloria had raised the boys alone since they were 3.
Their father, a man named Curtis, whose last name they didn't use, had walked out one night for cigarettes and never came back. No phone call, no letter, no explanation. Just an empty chair at the kitchen table that Gloria eventually replaced with a bookshelf. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She made sure the boys stayed in school, stayed off the streets, stayed together. On the night she died, her last words to Bryce were simple and steady, the way she always spoke. "Take care of your brother. Take care of each other. That's all I ask." Bryce had carried those words like stones in his chest ever since. After Gloria died, the system failed them. They were 19, too old for foster care, too young to have credit, too broke to rent. A social worker gave them a list of shelters. The shelters were full. Another caseworker referred them to a housing program with a 14-month wait list. They applied. They waited. They slept outside. The only thing they had left of their mother was her winter coat, a faded green parka with a broken zipper that she had worn to every overnight shift for 6 years. It still smelled like her, like cocoa butter and laundry detergent and something warm underneath both of those things that neither boy could name, but both of them recognized instantly. They took turns wearing it. Bryce on odd nights, Caleb on even ones. It was the warmest thing they owned. Edmund Thornton's penthouse sat 62 floors above Park Avenue. 3,000 square feet of Italian marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of silence that only money can buy. The kind of silence that swallows you whole if you let it.
He was 62 years old.
Founder and chairman of Thornton Holdings, a real estate empire that stretched across 14 states and 3 countries. Forbes had him at number 43 on their list. Net worth, $4.7 billion. He owned buildings in Manhattan the way some people own shoes, casually, abundantly, without thinking about most of them. But the penthouse was quiet. It had been quiet for 2 years.
His son Liam had died on a Sunday afternoon in October,
21 years old. A car accident on the Merritt Parkway in Connecticut. Wet leaves on pavement. A curve taken 2 miles per hour too fast. The kind of death that doesn't make sense because there's nothing to blame except physics and timing, and the ordinary cruelty of a road that looks safe until it isn't.
Liam was Edmund's only child.
The only person in the world who called him Dad instead of Mr. Thornton or Sir. The only person who could make him laugh at dinner, who left voicemails that rambled on for 3 minutes about nothing important, who once gave him a leather wallet for Father's Day with a note tucked inside that said, "For the man who gave me everything. L." Edmund still carried that wallet every day. It was the last gift Liam ever gave him. After the funeral, the silence moved in. It sat in every room. It filled the spaces where Liam's voice used to be. At the breakfast table, on the other end of the phone, in the hallway on Sunday mornings when he'd show up unannounced with bagels and coffee. Catherine, Edmund's wife of 26 years, couldn't take it. She said the silence was louder than screaming. She asked him to talk. He couldn't. She asked him to cry. He wouldn't. She filed for divorce 11 months after the burial, and Edmund signed the papers without a single word of protest.
He replaced grief with work.
18-hour days. Board meetings at 7 in the morning, conference calls at midnight. His assistants learned not to ask how he was doing. His business partners learned not to mention Liam's name. The world around Edmund Thornton kept moving, and he kept building, because building was the only thing that didn't require him to feel. Margaret Palmer, his executive assistant for 15 years, was the only person who saw through it. She kept a framed photo of Liam on her desk, the one from his college graduation where he was laughing at something off camera. Edmund walked past it every morning. He never asked her to take it down. Some mornings she caught him standing in front of it, just standing there, not moving, not speaking. Then he'd straighten his tie, walk into his office, and close the door. That was the life of Edmund Thornton on the morning his wallet went missing. It was a Tuesday, 5:40 in the morning. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the sidewalks were still slick and dark. Bryce was already up, pulling on his sneakers, a pair of gray Nikes with a hole near the left toe that he'd found in a donation bin outside a church on Atlantic Avenue. Caleb was awake beside him, sitting cross-legged on the cardboard, writing something in his notebook by the pale blue light of a phone screen with 11% battery left.
"I'm heading to Rosie's,"
Bryce said. "Be back by 9. Caleb nodded without looking up. Bryce walked the usual route. Down under the overpass, up the concrete steps, across Tillery Street, past the parking garage that always smelled like motor oil. He cut through the alley behind a French restaurant called Le Petit Jardin, where the kitchen staff sometimes left bread rolls in a bag by the dumpster. This morning, the bag wasn't there. He kept walking, past the bodega on the corner, past the dry cleaner with the cracked front window, past a woman in a long coat walking a small dog that looked like it was wearing a sweater. And then he saw it. A wallet, black leather, sitting on the sidewalk right at the edge of the curb, half hidden by a storm drain grate. It was wet but not soaked. It hadn't been there long. Bryce picked it up. It was heavy. Not heavy like a brick, heavy like something important. He opened it under the awning of a closed flower shop and felt his breath stop. Cash. A thick fold of $100 bills held together by a silver money clip. He counted them twice. 140 bills. $14,000. Behind the cash, 3 credit cards, all black, all embossed with a name he didn't recognize, Edmund A. Thornton. And behind the cards, a New York State driver's license with the same name and a photograph of a man with silver hair and sharp eyes. Bryce closed the wallet. He stood there for a long time, rain tapping the awning above him, and felt something crack open in his chest. $14,000. He could see it all at once. An apartment, a real one, with a door that locked and a kitchen with a stove. 6 months of rent in a studio in East New York. Groceries. A winter coat for Caleb that wasn't held together with safety pins. Bus passes. A phone plan. Maybe even a semester at community college. Everything they needed, right here, in his hands.
He turned around and walked back to the bridge.
Caleb looked up from his notebook when Bryce sat down across from him and held out the open wallet without a word. Caleb stared at the money. His lips parted slightly. He didn't reach for it. "Where?" he said. "Sidewalk, near Le Petit Jardin." Caleb looked at the driver's license, then back at the cash, then at Bryce. The silence between them was the loudest thing under that bridge.
Caleb did the math.
He always did the math. 14,000 divided by 2, 7,000 each. Enough for a deposit and first month's rent. Enough for food for 3 months. Enough to stop being invisible.
But the math didn't matter.
Not really, because both of them could hear their mother's voice. Not a memory, something more physical than that. A vibration in their ribs, a pressure behind their eyes. Like she was standing right there in the damp air between them, with her arms crossed and her chin tilted the way it always tilted when she was waiting for them to make the right choice. "You don't build a life on someone else's loss," Bryce said quietly.
Caleb closed his notebook.
He slid it into the plastic bag he used to keep it dry. Then he stood up and pulled on his shoes. "Let's go find him," he said. They walked out from under the bridge together, into the gray morning, into the rain. 2 19-year-old boys carrying $14,000 that didn't belong to them, heading toward a man they had never met, to return something they could have kept and no one would have ever known. No one except them. And that was enough. Thornton Holdings occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower on Lexington Avenue. The lobby was the kind of space designed to make you feel small. White marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A waterfall feature along the back wall that made a sound like money moving. Security guards in dark suits standing behind a reception desk the size of a car. Bryce and Caleb walked through the revolving door at 7:15 in the morning. They were still wet from the rain. Bryce was wearing a hoodie with a torn sleeve and jeans that hadn't been washed in 2 weeks. Caleb had on a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar and cargo pants held up with a belt made from a length of nylon rope. The guard behind the desk, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a name tag that read Stevens, looked up and immediately straightened. "Can I help you?"
"We're here to see Mr. Thornton,"
Bryce said. "Edmund Thornton." Stevens looked them up and down. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. He shifted his weight forward just slightly, the way people do when they're deciding whether to call for backup. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then I can't help you. Mr. Thornton doesn't take walk-ins."
"We found his wallet,"
Caleb said. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, directly, without any interest in being impressive. He held up the black leather wallet so Stevens could see it. Stevens stared at it, then at them, then at the wallet again. "Wait here."
He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory.
He turned his back to them and spoke in a low voice for about 30 seconds. When he hung up, his expression had shifted. Not warmer exactly, but different. Like a locked door that had been nudged open half an inch. "Someone's coming down."
They waited.
The lobby hummed with the sound of the waterfall and the click of heels on marble. Business people walked past them without looking. A woman in a gray suit stepped around Caleb like he was a piece of furniture. 4 minutes later, the elevator opened and a woman in her 50s stepped out. She had short auburn hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She walked with the kind of purpose that said she'd been solving problems for someone important for a very long time.
Margaret Palmer,
executive assistant to Edmund Thornton, 15 years. She approached the 2 young men and extended her hand. "I'm Margaret. You found Mr. Thornton's wallet?" Bryce handed it to her. She opened it, counted the cash without removing it, checked the cards, checked the license, Then she stopped. She turned the wallet over in her hands and ran her thumb across the leather. She knew this wallet. She had seen Edmund reach for it 1,000 times. At lunch meetings, at charity galas, at the coffee cart on the corner where he still paid in cash because Liam used to tease him about never learning to use Apple Pay. This was Liam's wallet, the one Edmund had been tearing apart his office looking for since Saturday night. Margaret looked up at the two boys standing in front of her, soaking wet, thin, young, the kind of young that reminded her of someone she used to see in a graduation photo on her desk. "Come with me," she said. She didn't ask them to wait. She didn't hand them a reward envelope and send them on their way. She pressed the elevator button, held the door open, and brought them up. 62 floors. Bryce watched the numbers climb on the digital display. He had never been in an elevator this fast. Caleb stood perfectly still beside him, his hands clasped behind his back the way he always stood when he was nervous. The doors opened to the top floor, a hallway with thick carpet and soft lighting and the faint smell of fresh coffee. Margaret walked them straight to the corner office at the end of the hall. She knocked once, then opened the door. Edmund Thornton was standing behind his desk when the door opened. He was on the phone, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. The office was enormous. A wall of windows behind him showed all of Manhattan laid out like a circuit board. Rooftops, cranes, bridges, the silver thread of the East River catching the early light. He looked up, saw Margaret, saw the two young men behind her, and then saw the wallet in her hand. He put the phone down without saying goodbye. Margaret set the wallet on his desk. These two gentlemen found it, on the street near East 72nd. Everything's inside, cash, cards, all of it. Edmund picked up the wallet slowly. He opened it the way a man opens a letter he's been waiting for. His thumb found the fold of bills first. Still thick, still held by the silver clip. Then the cards. Then the license. Then behind the license, in a small slot most people would never check, a folded piece of notebook paper with handwriting on it. He unfolded it, read it, refolded it, slid it back into the slot. Margaret knew what it said. Everyone in the office knew the story by now. For the man who gave me everything, L. Edmund looked at Bryce and Caleb for the first time. Really looked. Not the way Stevens had looked at them in the lobby, assessing, categorizing, filing them under "not supposed to be here." Edmund looked at them the way you look at something you weren't prepared to see. Two young men, 19, maybe 20. Thin in a way that wasn't fashion. It was hunger. Their clothes were damp and mismatched. Bryce's sneakers had a hole near the toe. Caleb's belt was a piece of nylon rope. They stood side by side, shoulders almost touching, with the kind of stillness that comes from learning early that the world doesn't make room for you unless you hold very, very still. "Sit down," Edmund said. His voice was quieter than Margaret expected. They sat, Bryce on the left, Caleb on the right. Two leather chairs that probably cost more than anything they had ever owned. Edmund sat across from them. He set the wallet on the desk between them like it was a piece of evidence. $14,000, he said. "You counted it?" "Yes, sir," Bryce said. "And the cards, you saw the cards?" "Yes, sir." "You could have used them. The cash alone. You could have disappeared with it. No one would have found you. No one would have known." Bryce didn't blink. "We would have known." Edmund leaned back in his chair. He studied Bryce's face, then Caleb's. The silence stretched. Margaret stood near the door, watching. "Why didn't you keep it?" Edmund asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Caleb looked at his brother. Bryce looked at the wallet. "Because it's not ours," Bryce said. Simple, final, the way his mother would have said it. Edmund opened his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the desk. "There's $1,000 in there. A thank you. Take it." Bryce looked at the envelope, then at Caleb, then back at Edmund. "No thank you, sir. We didn't come here for a reward." Edmund stared at him. A beat passed, then another. Margaret saw something shift in his face, a hairline crack in the surface he had spent 2 years building. It wasn't surprise exactly, it was recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when you see something in a stranger that reminds you of someone you lost. These boys were 19. Liam had been 21. "Where do you live?" Edmund asked. Bryce hesitated. Caleb answered. "Under a bridge in Brooklyn." The words landed on the marble floor of that corner office like a glass dropping. Edmund didn't flinch, but his hand, resting on the desk beside the wallet, curled into a slow fist. Margaret saw it. She had seen that fist once before, at the hospital, the night they told him about Liam. "Margaret," Edmund said without looking away from the two boys in front of him. "Clear my afternoon." Margaret nodded. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Edmund didn't tell the twins what he was doing. He shook their hands that morning, thanked them again, and had Margaret call a car to take them wherever they wanted to go. They asked to be dropped off at the Brooklyn Public Library. The driver said they didn't speak the entire ride. That afternoon, Edmund made a phone call to a man named Victor Holloway. Private investigator, discreet, expensive. The kind of man who could find out everything about a person in 48 hours without that person ever knowing they'd been looked into. "Two names," Edmund said. "Bryce Wells, Caleb Wells, twins, 19 years old, currently homeless. I want to know everything." The report came back on Thursday. Victor's file was 11 pages long, single-spaced. It read like a case study in how every system designed to protect young people can fail them one by one. Gloria Wells, mother, died 8 months prior, stage 4 lung cancer, diagnosed late because she couldn't afford regular checkups, treated at Kings County Hospital under emergency Medicaid, died in a hallway because the oncology ward was full. No life insurance, no savings, no next of kin listed other than her 2 sons. Father, Curtis Delaney, left the family when the boys were 3. Last known address, Tallahassee, Florida, 2014. No contact since. No child support ever paid. A warrant out in 2 states for unpaid fines. A man who vanished the way smoke vanishes, completely and without apology. After Gloria's death, the twins were referred to the city's housing assistance program. Application submitted. Wait list position, 412. Estimated wait time, 14 months. In the meantime, they were given a list of emergency shelters. Every shelter on the list was at capacity. A follow-up call was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The call was never made. They fell through the cracks, not because the cracks were hidden, because the cracks were wide enough to walk through. But the part of the report that made Edmund set down his reading glasses and stare out the window for a full minute was page 8. Caleb Wells, self-taught programmer, used public library computers, the Brooklyn branch on Flatbush Avenue, to learn Python, JavaScript, and front-end development. Built 2 functioning web applications, a weather dashboard with location-based alerts, and a personal finance tool designed specifically for users living below the federal poverty line. Both apps were live on a free hosting service. Both showed clean code and thoughtful user interface design. The librarian, a woman named Sandra Owens, had written a letter of recommendation for Caleb to a community college program. He never applied because the application fee was $45. Bryce Wells, employed informally as a dishwasher at Rosie's Diner on Tillery Street, paid in cash, never missed a shift. The owner, Dolores Patterson, described him as the most reliable person I've ever hired, and I've been running this place for 30 years. Bryce split every dollar he earned with his brother. He kept no savings for himself. He had turned down 2 offers to work at other restaurants because the hours would have overlapped with Caleb's library time, and someone needed to walk him home after dark. On page 10, Victor noted something he said he almost didn't include because it felt too personal. During his surveillance of the bridge site, he observed the 2 brothers' living area. It was organized, clean, given the circumstances. 2 sleeping areas made from flattened cardboard, a tarp overhead, a row of water bottles, and on a small shelf made from a piece of plywood balanced on 2 cinder blocks, a single framed photograph of a woman in a green coat, smiling. Edmund read the report twice. Then he did something he hadn't done since the morning after Liam's funeral. He drove to Brooklyn himself, alone, no driver, no security. He parked 3 blocks from the bridge and walked. He didn't go under the overpass. He stood on the sidewalk above it, looking down through the chain-link fence at the place where 2 19-year-old boys had built something that looked, from a distance, almost like a home. He sat in his car afterward for 20 minutes, the engine running, the heater on, his hands on the steering wheel, and he cried. For the first time in 2 years. Not for Liam, not for himself, for them. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. Caleb was at the library. Bryce was walking back from Rosie's with a bag of leftover muffins and a thermos of coffee Dolores had pressed into his hands with a look that said, "Don't argue." It was Margaret. "Mr. Thornton would like to invite you and your brother to dinner this evening. His home, 7 o'clock. A car will pick you up wherever you'd like." Bryce almost said no. Dinner at a billionaire's penthouse. 2 homeless kids sitting at a table they had no business sitting at. It sounded like the setup to a joke, and he wasn't in the mood to be the punchline. But Caleb, when Bryce told him, looked up from his laptop screen and said, "We should go." So they went. The car, a black sedan with leather seats that smelled new, picked them up at the library at 6:30. The driver didn't make small talk. He drove them into Manhattan, through the tunnel, up Park Avenue, and pulled into an underground garage beneath a building so tall that Caleb had to lean forward in his seat to see the top of it. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. Edmund was waiting. He was wearing a sweater, no suit, no tie. He looked like a different man than the one they'd met in the office, smaller somehow, softer around the edges, like the armor had been set aside for the evening. "Thank you for coming," he said. He meant it. You could hear it. The table was set for 3. White plates, silver forks, cloth napkins folded into triangles. A roasted chicken in the center, still steaming. Green beans, mashed potatoes, a basket of bread. Bryce sat down and stared at the spread of silverware beside his plate. 3 forks, 2 knives, 2 spoons. He didn't know which one to use first. He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the forks like they were a puzzle he hadn't studied for. Edmund noticed. He didn't say a word. He picked up the chicken leg with his bare hand, bit into it, and set it down on his plate. Grease on his fingers. A small, deliberate rebellion against his own table setting. Bryce exhaled. Caleb almost smiled. They ate. After dinner, Edmund leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. The city glowed behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 62 floors of silence. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "I had someone look into your situation. I know about your mother. I know about the shelters. I know about the bridge." Bryce's jaw tightened. Caleb set down his glass. "I'm not telling you this to embarrass you," Edmund continued. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand that what I'm about to offer isn't coming from pity. It's not charity. It's not a handout." He paused, looked at both of them. "I'd like to provide you with an apartment, fully furnished, 2 bedrooms, midtown, paid for. I'd also like to cover tuition at any college program you choose. Full ride, books, fees, everything. And I'd like to offer both of you internships at Thornton Holdings, paid positions, real work, not busy work." The room went still. Bryce shook his head. "Mr. Thornton, we can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because that's charity, and we don't take charity." Edmund didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and spoke the way a man speaks when he's saying something he's been rehearsing in his head all day. "Let me tell you something about my son. Liam was 21 when he died. He was kind, funny, stubborn as hell. He used to tell me that the only thing worse than failing is never giving someone the chance to succeed. I didn't understand what he meant until I met you two." He let that settle. "This isn't charity, Bryce. I'm investing in 2 people who walked into my building soaking wet, handed me $14,000 they could have kept, and asked for nothing in return. That's not someone who needs a handout. That's someone who deserves a door." Caleb spoke, quietly, the way he always did. "Why us?" Edmund was quiet for a long time. The kind of long that makes you hold your breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, thinner, like something underneath it was trying to surface. because you remind me of him." He didn't say Liam's name, he didn't need to.
The deal was simple.
They would live in the apartment. They would enroll in school. They would work at Thornton Holdings, and they would earn everything they received. Edmund would open the door. They would walk through it on their own 2 feet. Bryce looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded. One small dip of the chin, the way they'd been communicating since before they could talk. "Okay," Bryce said, "but we're paying you back, every dollar, someday." Edmund shook his hand. "I'm counting on it." That night, Margaret received a text from Edmund at 11:40. 3 words: "Clear Liam's room." The next morning, 2 bedrooms were being prepared on the 62nd floor. New sheets, new towels, 2 desks, 2 lamps, and on each nightstand a framed copy of the same photograph. Gloria Wells, smiling in a green coat. Edmund had found it in Victor's report. The story hit the press 3 weeks later. Someone at Thornton Holdings leaked it. Probably an intern, probably for a few $100s and a byline credit. The headline ran in the New York Post on a Wednesday morning. "Billionaire takes in homeless twins after they return his wallet." By Thursday, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, cable news. The comment section was exactly what you'd expect from the internet. 60% supportive, 30% suspicious, and 10% cruel enough to make you lose faith in human beings entirely. "Publicity stunt. Tax write-off. Bet they're sleeping with someone on his staff. Billionaire buys himself 2 pets. Those kids are running a con. Watch." Bryce made the mistake of reading the comments once. He didn't read them again. At Columbia, where Caleb had enrolled in the computer science program and Bryce in the business management track, things were more subtle. Nobody called them names to their faces, but the whispers traveled the hallways like drafts under a door. Scholarship kids, charity cases, the Billionaires Project. A student in Bryce's economics class, a blonde kid named Tyler with a trust fund and a jawline that looked like it had been designed by committee, made a comment during a group discussion that landed like a slap. "Some people earn their way here, other people just find a wallet." The room went quiet. The professor looked uncomfortable. Bryce stared straight ahead. His hands were flat on the desk, pressing down so hard his knuckles turned pale. He didn't respond, but that night he packed a bag, folded his clothes, zipped it shut, set it by the door of his room on the 62nd floor, and sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the city lights through the window. Caleb found him like that at midnight. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on the floor across from his brother, cross-legged, the way he used to sit under the bridge. Then he pulled out his notebook, the same one, the one with the water stains and the bent corners, the one he'd carried through every night on the cardboard. He opened it to the first page and held it up. Gloria's handwriting. Faded blue ink on lined paper. Words she had written on the inside cover the Christmas before she got sick. "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." Bryce looked at the page, his jaw clenched, his eyes burned. He didn't cry, but he unzipped the bag. 3 days later, Edmund found out about the packed bag. Margaret told him. She told him everything. The article, the comments, the kid in Bryce's class. Edmund didn't say anything for a long time. He stood at his office window, looking out at the skyline, his hands in his pockets. That evening, he showed up at the apartment unannounced. No driver, no Margaret. Just Edmund in a sweater and khakis, carrying a paper bag from a deli on the corner. He made sandwiches, turkey and Swiss on rye. He sat at the kitchen counter across from Bryce while Caleb worked on his laptop in the next room. "Margaret told me," Edmund said. Bryce stared at his sandwich. "I'm fine. You packed a bag." "I unpacked it." "I know, but I want to tell you something." Edmund set down his sandwich. "After Liam died, I tried to quit. Not the company, everything. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped answering the phone. I sat in this penthouse for 11 days and didn't leave once. Margaret had to break in with a spare key." He looked at Bryce. "Running is easy. Staying is the thing that takes everything you've got. And I need you to know, the people who talk, the people who type things in comment sections, the people who make jokes in classrooms, they don't know you. They've never slept on cardboard. They've never given back $14,000 they needed more than oxygen. Their opinion of you is worth exactly what they paid for it. Nothing.
Bryce didn't look up,
But his shoulders dropped. Just slightly. The way tension leaves a body when it finally hears the thing it's been waiting to hear. "You're not my project," Edmund said quietly. "You're not my charity case. You're not my replacement for Liam. You're Bryce, and that's enough." They finished their sandwiches in silence, the good kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Bryce stayed. 14 months passed. Caleb finished his first year of computer science with a 3.9 GPA. He built a workforce management application that Thornton Holdings adopted across 3 departments. His professor called it the most elegant solution a freshman has ever submitted. Caleb didn't attend the awards ceremony. He was in the server room fixing a bug. Bryce finished with a 3.7 in business management. He organized a fundraiser for a homeless youth shelter in the Bronx that raised $86,000 in one evening. Dolores Patterson from Rosie's Diner sat in the back row and cried the whole time. They had moved out of the penthouse 6 months earlier, rented a 2-bedroom in Washington Heights with their combined salaries. Small kitchen, dripping faucet, a radiator that clanked at night. They loved it. Edmund visited every Sunday. He brought deli sandwiches, a tradition none of them acknowledged but none of them ever missed. On a Tuesday in October, exactly 14 months after they found the wallet, Margaret called Bryce. "Mr. Thornton needs you and Caleb at a meeting tomorrow. 10 o'clock. I'll send the address." Caleb looked up the address on his phone. "It's a courthouse." Bryce felt something cold move through his stomach. A courthouse. Were they in trouble? Had someone filed a complaint? They arrived the next morning in their best clothes. Bryce in a navy blue suit, the first suit he'd ever owned, bought with his own money. Caleb in a dark gray blazer with his notebook tucked inside the jacket pocket. Like a talisman, like a piece of his mother he could reach for whenever the world felt unsteady.
the room was small.
Wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner, a few rows of wooden chairs. Margaret was already there, sitting in the second row, holding a tissue. Her eyes were red. Edmund stood at the front beside an attorney. Charcoal suit, a tie Bryce had never seen, deep navy with thin silver stripes. His hands were clasped. He looked nervous. Edmund Thornton, a man who had faced boardrooms of billionaires and senators, looked nervous.
The judge entered.
A woman in her 60s with silver hair and glasses. Case number 2026-AD-04571. In the matter of the petition for adult adoption filed by Edmund Arthur Thornton. Bryce stopped breathing. Caleb's hand found his brother's arm. His fingers gripped the fabric of the navy suit. Edmund stepped forward. He looked at the judge. Then he turned to Bryce and Caleb.
"Your Honor,"
he said. His voice was steady, but underneath it something trembled. "I'd like to formally adopt Bryce and Caleb Wells as my sons." The silence had weight. You could feel it pressing against your chest. Bryce didn't move, his vision blurred. 14 months of dinners, Sunday sandwiches, late-night phone calls, Edmund showing up in a sweater making turkey on rye, telling him that staying was the hardest thing, that he was enough.
The judge reviewed the file.
6 months of preparation, background checks, home visits, letters of support from Margaret, Dolores Patterson, Sandra Owens at the Brooklyn Public Library. Edmund had been building this case in silence for half a year. "Mr. Wells," the judge said, looking at Caleb, "do you consent to this adoption?"
Caleb opened his mouth.
Nothing came out. He pressed his lips together. His chin shook. Then a sound escaped, something between a breath and a sob. The first time he had cried in front of anyone since the night Gloria died. He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Wells," the judge said, turning to Bryce, "do you consent?" Bryce stood. He looked at Edmund, this man who had found them, fed them, believed in them, and never once asked for anything in return. 2 words, the only 2 that mattered.
"Thank you, Dad."
Edmund's face broke. The surface he had rebuilt over 2 years cracked open, and what came through was raw and bright and uncontainable. He pulled Bryce into his arms. Caleb rose and joined them. 3 men holding each other in a wood-paneled room in downtown Manhattan. The judge waited. Then she smiled. The gavel came down. Bryce and Caleb Thornton Wells. Official. Permanent. Family. Margaret blew her nose into her tissue. She was smiling so hard her face hurt. 3 years later, Caleb Thornton Wells sat in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of Thornton Holdings. He was 22 years old, lead software engineer on the company's Civic Technology division, a department that didn't exist before he proposed it. His team of 9 built free digital tools for people navigating housing assistance, food programs, and emergency shelters. The budgeting app he had once coded on a library computer was now used by over 40,000 people across 3 states. A venture capital firm had offered to acquire it for $2 million. Caleb turned them down. Some things aren't for sale. He still carried his notebook, the one with the water stains and the bent corners, and his mother's handwriting on the first page. It sat on his desk, next to his laptop, every single day. Bryce Thornton Wells ran the Thornton Foundation's Youth Housing Initiative. He was 22 and already managed a $12 million annual budget dedicated to one thing: making sure no 19-year-old in New York City had to sleep under a bridge because every shelter on a list was full. In its first year, the program housed 314 young people. Bryce knew the number by heart because he counted every single one. Dolores Patterson still worked at Rosie's. Bryce stopped by every Friday morning. He didn't wash dishes anymore, but he always brought muffins, the expensive kind, from a bakery in Tribeca. Dolores told him they weren't as good as her leftovers. He laughed. She was probably right. Edmund Thornton stepped down as chairman of Thornton Holdings the year after the adoption. Not because he was tired, because he had found something he wanted to do more. He joined the board of 3 nonprofit organizations focused on foster care reform and youth homelessness. He testified before a congressional subcommittee about the gaps in the system, the 14-month wait lists, the follow-up calls that were never made, the $45 application fees that stood between a kid and a college degree. He smiled more now. Margaret noticed it first. Then the board. Then the press. A profile in the Times described him as a man who found his second act not in business, but in fatherhood. The wallet, Liam's wallet, the one that started everything, sat in a glass display case in Edmund's home office. Not on Park Avenue anymore. He had sold the penthouse. He lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn now, 4 blocks from the bridge where Bryce and Caleb used to sleep. Next to the wallet, in a simple silver frame, was a photograph of 3 men at a dinner table. Edmund in the middle, Bryce on his left, Caleb on his right. All of them laughing at something the camera hadn't captured but didn't need to. On the wall behind the display case, in small black letters, was a sentence Edmund had asked a calligrapher to write. Sometimes the thing you lose leads you to the thing you need most. And below that, in Gloria's handwriting, scanned from the notebook, enlarged and printed on archival paper, "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." They did. If this story made you feel something, anything, drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you found that wallet? Would you have given it back? Be honest. Then share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button, because these are the stories that don't get told unless someone presses play.